started. Developing skills for an Agile PMO. We at PMO Flashmob, I don't know how many people have come across PMO Flashmob before. Quick show of hands. Heard of PMO Flashmob? Fantastic. Okay, so just briefly for the people that have not come across PMO Flashmob before, we are a PMO networking and informal learning group for people that work in PMOs. And essentially what we do is have get-togethers, social meetups. We have things called mini masterclasses where we get together and have things like lectures and sessions that we record, and everything's available for free on the website. You log in, loads of videos, loads of reports. And that's why we're here today, because we're talking about one of the latest reports that we've pulled together. So essentially, PMO Flashmob is open to anybody in the UK, around the world. Just log on to it, have a look at some of the interesting stuff we've been doing now into its 5th year. So there's quite a lot of stuff on there. Some of it's sometimes a bit hard to find, but I'm sure you'll have fun having a look. So in terms of the report, if you've not already picked one up, there's some available at the back. And essentially, this is our 3rd report. We do one each year. So we've already had reports on portfolio management and also resource management. And essentially what we do with these is try to understand how real PMO managers, practitioners, actually do some of this stuff that we're required to do in our organisations today. So, for example, Agile PMO, we're hearing a lot about the subject, but what are we actually doing, and what are people actually doing with this subject, and how are they making it work within their organisations? So it's one of those things where we think, well, how's the best way to get what they do out? So the best thing to do is to take them out for a boozy lunch, ask them some questions, and you can see the questions that we actually ask in the funny little bit at the back that is our menu for the meal. So basically we spend 3 hours over lunch talking about and trying to extract from them exactly how they do some of this stuff that we all seem to have the same challenges about. So this time it was about Agile. So essentially what we're going to talk about today is the report itself, and obviously you can read that at your leisure, and we will go through some of the things that are obviously found in here. But essentially the reason why we wanted to do Agile is that, well, I don't think I really have to tell you. I mean, you're probably sitting there thinking, yep, it's been coming up in our organisation. We've had leaders that are coming to us saying we want to be more agile, whatever that is. We want to do more agile projects. PMO, can you help us? Go agile, be agile. And there's a lot of things that we started with the meal was actually, what does it mean in your world, Mr. PMO Manager, Mrs. PMO Manager, to be agile? So actually we start at that point. Let's understand what we're talking about when we talk about Agile PMO. Broadly, it's 2 things. You're supporting in your organisation agile projects. And the second part was about being able to support your organisation in terms of business agility, being faster, smarter, that kind of thing. So that was the kind of where we were in terms of a starting point. Essentially, one of the great quotes that came out is that actually agile projects are no different from supporting any other types of projects. Yeah, it's essentially still project delivery. It's just the way that they're doing project delivery is changing slightly. So that's what we need to understand. And actually, some of the PMO services and functions that you're offering already are already fit for purpose with Agile PMO. But there were some really interesting insights about actually how some of it is going to be quite difficult, even though we're told that Agile projects, leaner, smarter, faster, easier, might not necessarily be the case. So Eileen's going to take us through an overview of the question that we asked was, what are some of the key functions and services for a PMO now supporting Agile projects? What do they need to be aware of? What stays the same? What might change? And here's some of the top 8 things that they shared with us over that lunch. The clicker's not working.
Okay. Are we on? Perfect. Right then. So one of the really interesting things we found about am I switched on? Do you want to give me the other microphone? technical issues. Oh, are we there? Perfect, thank you. Right then, one of the interesting things we found, we went and said, what are the kind of the top 8 things that come to mind that you're going to have to do differently in that lovely phrase, the bimodal PMO, or just agile projects in general. And as Lindsay said, these are the 8 that came up with. And even on first glance, what bemused us, we'll use that phrase, what bemused us is actually the things that are going to change are potentially some of the things that we're not particularly good at already. Yes, so that kind of provides almost a double challenge. Not only are we going to have to get better at the things we currently might do, but we're then going to have to work out different ways of doing some of those things. So we'll pick that up as we kind of go along. However, the first one is probably the least surprising. Now nothing's working, so we'll do it that way instead. Is probably the least surprising. When we started talking about the different functions and services that a PMO provides, and we've done some kind of, there's been some academic research and some anecdotal research, the first thing that always comes to the top of the list, almost without exception, is reporting for a PMO. Yes, there's very few PMOs get away without doing any kind of reporting. And this was the first thing where potentially you will start seeing some changes as you go and start delivering projects in an agile way. Because the metrics and the measures that are used by agile projects are not necessarily the same metrics and measures that are used by traditional waterfall projects. The other thing is, in most organizations, and it's a curse and a blessing, we tend to have some very standardized reporting, yes? Every 4 weeks or every month, we all have to fill in the same template. We then in the PMO can collate it all up, or we extract information from registers on systems and produce the same report every month to the senior management team or the exec. Yes? And they've got used to it. It took us a long time to get this established, and they've eventually started understanding some of the numbers and what they might actually mean on that report. And all of a sudden, we're now going to say, well, actually, you're going to get a whole load, not just of different numbers, but of different pictures, diagrams, and they're going to mean a whole load of different things to perhaps what you've seen before. And actually, it takes some time, not just in terms of working with each of the individual delivery teams in terms of how they're doing their measurements and what metrics they're using, but actually to retrain some of the senior executives in terms of kind of what that translates to and how that leads to some of the decision making. And a lot of it actually is not just about changing the metrics, but it's about changing some of the mindset, not just of the senior managers, but actually of some of the people who work within the PMOs themselves. There are still some PMOs who are known as the project police, yes? And sadly, I do know some PMOs who will send your status report back to you because you've filled it in 12-font Comic Sans as opposed to 10-font Arial, yes? So we really have to, it's not even just a case of that the templates are changing. We're going to have to think more agile ourselves in terms of how can we present the information that's required to make decisions by senior management that clearly demonstrates where we're at and what the progress is. The other thing that becomes quite interesting is that a lot of the ethos around agile delivery is that we change and kind of flex what's been delivered as we go through the various sprints. And the decision on what's included in each sprint is dynamic based on the backlog and business information in terms of the value and the benefits that is going to be delivered. And there is the potential at this point for the PMO actually to do some reverse reporting. So instead of just reporting out to the business and the executives about how projects and programs are being delivered, we have the potential to start presenting business information back to the delivery teams to help them in their prioritization of that backlog. So that's a different use of the PMO and the reporting and the translation of information back into the project world. So, forgot it's not working. Page down with that one. So the second aspect that is changed is the business case. Okay? How good are our business cases? How many of our organisations write business cases to get the funding? Once the funding's received, everybody breathes a sigh of relief, and the business case is put on the shelf, and we've kind of forgotten about that. Yes, we've got the funding, mission accomplished. In an agile project, your business case is absolutely critical for identifying the value that's going to be delivered from each of the various sprints that are going to go through that. And the other thing that becomes really important is your sponsor, who now hopefully is even more actively engaged in the prioritization of the work that's delivered in the project, actually needs to have an even better understanding of what and how the business case is pulled together and how that drives the framework for prioritization on the project as it delivers through the various deliveries. How many of our sponsors are competent, truly competent? Hands up if you've got truly competent sponsors. Not a single hand. No, that's a wreck. Oh, we've got one. Excellent. Excellent. I'm happy with one hand, yes? So if we don't have competent sponsors, yes, it is a role of the PMO to ensure the kind of the accountabilities and the roles and responsibilities of projects and programs are understood and embedded across the organization. So if we want to be running agile projects, then one of the things we have to do is upskill the sponsors so they can truly do their role on those projects. Next aspect we looked at was benefits realization. And again, this is one of those areas. Who's good at benefits realization? I thought you were all taking photographs. I think you were all putting your hand up there to say you were good at benefits realization. Again, this is another topic that is typically weak. And it's always interesting in terms of when we talk about projects and project management, about whether projects actually deliver benefits or whether they deliver outputs that enable the business to deliver benefits. Okay? And in an agile project where you're constantly driven and saying actually we're kind of very much kind of benefits driven in terms of our delivery, you actually need to be able to demonstrate that those benefits are being delivered. And you're only going to be able to do that if you do active benefits realization and look at the whole change management piece. So all of those things, again, that we've typically found quite difficult, we have to fully get to grips with. And again, it feeds back into the reporting. It's not just that the project team have delivered some output, it's the fact that that's been taken into the business and it's used, and it actually is delivering the benefits that we'd anticipated, that we'd recorded in the business case. So it all kind of ties up. So the other thing that's really important with the benefits realization, at some point you will get to some diminishing returns and you need to understand at what point the project needs to stop. Yes? And again, that goes back to what I said about reporting, feeding back the business metrics back to the project team to say, actually, this is the impact of the deliveries that you're actually kind of sending over to us on a regular basis. Next thing is value. Who thinks value is the same as benefits? There's a few people. Excellent. It is. Yes, and it's really interesting how we kind of use different terms. We use this term benefits realization to kind of really derive value, but actually value is very much the same thing. Some of the terminology we use and some of the techniques are all about demonstrating that we are continuing to deliver value frequently and often from an agile delivery, and that's what it's all about. So, but how do we actually kind of measure value? How do we identify that value in the first place? How many use kind of benefits mapping, value stream mapping in your organizations? Yes? So we've got lots of, not very many hands to some of these questions. So again, so these are some of the tools and techniques that as a PMO, we may need to introduce into the workplace to allow us to identify what value can be delivered and identify when and how that value is being delivered into the organization. And just a little kind of twist on that. Yes, one of the interesting kind of assumptions is that organizations that introduce agile delivery save money. Yes, anybody kind of heard that rumor? So one of the things that you will have to do as a PMO is potentially demonstrate that delivering projects in an agile manner is actually delivering additional value to the business by doing it in an agile way. Can we get our heads around that one? So each project is delivering value, but actually by delivering it in an agile way, we're being more effective and efficient in our project delivery. So even as a PMO, we may be asked to do some of the value mapping for doing things in a agile way as opposed to a waterfall way. And it may be a question that we go through right at the very beginning of our project to say, actually, what's the best way to deliver this project? Can you tell us whether there's any benefit from doing it in an agile way or doing it in a waterfall way? And again, that's an interesting question that the PMO will potentially have to answer. Now, it's interesting, we've picked this up as a lot of people have talked about being able to have, to be able to be a good coach as a skill and a competence for the PMO. And it's definitely something that's come up in the competency framework that the PMO Flashmob are developing. And it's interesting because in agile development, there's often this role of the agile coach. And then there's two things here. One is from a PMO perspective to use the agile coach to understand what's been actually rolled out, but also to use some of their terminology and their understanding and their expertise to educate people outside the delivery team. Yes? So you can use the agile coaches as a resource for you as a PMO person. Secondly, is potentially the agile coaches could become part of the resource team of the PMO. Because certainly one of the things that we will have to do is make sure that we've got adequate coaching for each of the PMO teams, each of the agile teams that are delivering into your organization. So a key role and a key skill for PMO. So, risk management. Another area that potentially needs to change. One of the things we always get taught in risk management is there is no such thing as a risk-free project. Yes? And believe me, it doesn't change just because we're delivering it by agile method. Some would argue that it does, but I think it may just be kind of some different risks. So what we need to make sure is that the risk and the risk management process is fully embedded within the way of working of the agile team. Yes, we may not have the kind of the standard kind of risk checklists and risk workshops that we have on a waterfall project. But if we're not having them in the same way, we need to make sure that the risks are still being identified and mitigated and measured through the agile delivery. And again, we may have to be flexible in our approach from a PMO perspective in terms of how that's actually going to be delivered out in the teams. And again, one of the key things that we will need to do is translate that back up into the organization when we're trying to get a holistic view of the risk associated with our program or our portfolio. So the consolidation of risk across agile and waterfall projects and presenting that back to the business is a translation issue which often falls on the PMO. And penultimately, our friends in finance. I was reminded the first talk I ever did at Project Challenge was a number of years ago now called How to Get Finance to Pay for the Implementation Party. And it was really a kind of a talk about how we'd implemented project management in an organization, and making friends with the finance department was an absolute requirement in order for it to be successful. And believe me, you have to go through all of that relationship making again when you start introducing agile projects. So for finance departments who've eventually got to grips with waterfall departments and staged release of finance through individual kind of stage gates and understand that process, it is a massive education process for them to understand how finances need to be released, how we do forecasting in terms of spend. Yes, because each of the sprints may have different spend associated with them, how that relates back to the business case, and how they can ensure that the correct financial governance is happening on the individual project. So there's a big education piece to do with finance. And finally, out of the 8, was about resource management. Now, the last paper we wrote was actually on resource management, because we'd identified that actually benefits, funnily enough, had gone off the too hard pile and was actually starting to be delivered in organisations. And what had risen to the top in organisations was resource management. How do we manage all of our resources across all of the various projects that sit in the organisation? How do we manage, particularly more interesting, where individuals and project managers are not working full-time on projects? How does that work in organisations, and how do we make sure that we've got the right levels and controls and resource allocation? Adding it to an Agile project where we're committed that all of the individuals stay glued to that project through the life of the project becomes an additional challenge in terms of our resource management piece. So it adds a level of kind of complexity. The other thing is, a lot of the individuals who are working in the organisation, again, will have to be trained, because their role as a project manager, as a business analyst, as a subject matter expert, or as a kind of the business representative, will potentially have to learn how to do things in a different way. So the whole kind of capability piece needs to be managed, and again, that often falls on the PMO. So 8 really kind of things that we either do now or are attempting to do, a number of which are actually kind of quite difficult and are already on our kind of we're struggling to do this pile, that we're really going to have to upskill ourselves and the people we work with in order to be able to implement Agile in our organisations.
I mean, obviously you can read about all of those 8 in more detail in the report, but there's some of the things that I personally picked out that I thought were really interesting, and this was this conversation that the guys had about being a translator, and they were talking about what actually happens in the early days of an organisation saying you want to be Agile or go Agile. And one of the guys was talking about, well, actually in those early days we had to be a translator, so we had to understand Agile, and they talk again in the report about where they got good insights into what they should be thinking about, and we've got those in here, and you can have a look at those. But they had to play that role of translator between, this is the world that we've been delivering projects in, here's the Agile stuff coming in, and actually we have to do a translation role back into the business to say, look, the guys are doing the Agile projects and they're talking about progress in this way, whereas you were used to seeing progress in a different way, and performing that translation role. But they were very clear that it's only a short-term position that they're playing until things start to normalise. In other words, there's that camp there about getting into change management. The other thing that was really interesting is one of our previous talks, and you can have a look at this on the PMO Flashmob website, is where we introduced the idea of the PMO principles, that a PMO does have principles. And one of the reasons why we brought this into the conversation right there is that if a PMO does have certain principles, you use your principles to guide you through waters when it's unknown territory. For example, with the PMO, Agile PMO stuff, there is nobody that's mandating and saying that PMOs should be doing X, Y, or Z in support of these Agile projects. So actually, you're probably going to be going in uncharted waters yourself, but it's your principles that help you to be able to charter those waters. And we talk about, well, what are those kind of principles? And they're available, again, like I said, there's books available through Amazon, but we've got the presentation from the last Project Challenge that you might want to have a look at in terms of these are the underlying principles of your PMO that will take you into new waters, like Agile PMO, and no doubt over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years' time, as businesses continue to change, it might be Agile today, who knows what it's going to be in 10 years' time, but actually falling on your principles helps you to think about new ways forward, new processes, new change, and so on. So that was the thing that was brought up in the conversation that I think is worth sharing. as Eileen has said, what I found really interesting in that table was all the things that they were talking about are all the things that we find really, really difficult. But I was always under the impression that they say that agile projects are easier to do. But actually, you've got to be great at your business cases, your benefits realization piece, the resourcing bit, the sponsorship, all these bits that we are traditionally struggling with. These are the things that we need to have in place in the agile world. And not only that, the other thing that they also need to be thinking about is that we're not just supporting agile projects, we are supporting the whole portfolio, and they are doing projects being delivered in different ways. And it's how do we bring that hybrid together? How do we support waterfall projects and agile together and bring them together and allow us to be able to extract the information, the data that allows decision making to happen, because we're getting different metrics and measures from them. So we do something like this, it raises lots of questions, but essentially what it's allowing us to do now is we think, well, Flashmob, the whole idea is it's about bringing people together to talk about certain challenges we have. And by the way, I think we're going to have sessions around business cases. I think we're going to have to visit benefits realization again. We're certainly going to have to look at sponsorship and value and coaching and all these other things. So actually, we still need to be looking and concentrating on really good practice, regardless of what environment the projects are being delivered in. That's it. Thank you very much for hanging around to the last session. Any questions? The reports are at the back. And just to also let you know that we carry on trying to understand how we can support our businesses better in a project delivery. So just let you know that there's a Lean Agile PMO training that's very successful in February that you ran in London. We're now going to be doing that in Edinburgh and London going forward, so there'll be more information. And anything that you've seen today, we've recorded the session. The presentation will go out to you if you'd like to receive that. All you need to do is sign up on the PMO Flashmob website and you will get notification. And if you want to make your way to the stand, you can also leave your details there as well. Okay? Thank you very much.